Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever noticed how much of your suffering began the moment you stopped listening to yourself? Think about it, not the loud voice in your head filled with fears and opinions, but the quiet one, the gentle whisper beneath the noise. The one that said, "This doesn't feel right," when you smiled just to keep the peace. The one that said, "You're meant for more," when you shrank to fit someone else's vision of you. You spend years trying to belong, to be enough, to be acceptable. And in the process, we betray ourselves in small, nearly invisible ways until the ache becomes unbearable. Until one day, the exhaustion isn't just physical, it's spiritual. That is the breaking point. That is the moment healing begins. But not because someone finally loved you right, not because life became easy. It begins because you chose yourself. Not in defiance, but in remembrance. You remembered that no one is coming to save you. And that was never a tragedy, it was your freedom. You remembered that it's not your job to be likable if it costs you your peace. You remembered that choosing yourself is not abandonment of others, it is the reclamation of your wholeness. Do you know why so many people stay unhealed? Because healing requires honesty. Brutal honesty. Brutal honesty. It requires looking at your life not from a lens of blame, but from the clarity of truth. Where did you silence yourself? Where did you make yourself small to be accepted? Where did you say yes when your soul screamed no? We call this normal. We wear masks not just to fit in, but to survive. But you were never meant to survive your life. You were meant to live it. And to live fully, you must choose yourself again and again in every room, in every relationship, in every quiet moment when your body whispers, "This is not love." Because healing is not a destination. It is a devotion, a quiet, steady vow to return to yourself every time the world pulls you away. It will be uncomfortable. You will lose people. You will be misunderstood. But you will gain something far greater, peace. And peace isn't found in applause, in titles, in achievements. It's found in alignment, when your outer life reflects your inner truth. This is why healing begins the moment you choose yourself. Because until then, your love is conditional. You love yourself only when others do. You believe in yourself only when they approve. You exist only when you're validated. But when you choose yourself without reason, without permission, you finally break free. You stop performing. You stop chasing people who don't see you. You stop apologizing for existing. And in that stillness, healing enters. Not like a storm, but like a sunrise. Quiet, soft, inevitable. Here's the question. When was the last time you chose yourself? Not because the world approved, but because your soul asked. Because until you do, nothing will feel enough. No love, no success, no approval. But once you do, once you dare to choose yourself, you won't need to be fixed. You'll realize you were never broken. You were simply buried. And now you're coming back home. You are not broken, you're just buried beneath what you're not. This is not just a comforting statement, it's a deep truth about the nature of suffering and identity. Most people walk through life thinking they are flawed, defective, or incomplete. But in reality, what they carry is not brokenness, it's misalignment. It's the weight of who they were told to be, stacked layer upon layer over who they truly are. When you feel lost, anxious, disconnected, it isn't because something within you is wrong, it's because something unnatural has been added to you, something that doesn't belong to your essence. Think of a seed. It contains everything it needs to become a tree. It doesn't need to be fixed or added to, it only needs the right environment to grow. But imagine if you buried that seed under layers of concrete, telling it, grow into something else, become what others expect. Stay still, don't reach upward. Eventually, that seed would stop trying. Not because it was incapable, but because it was burdened. That's what we do to ourselves. From childhood, we inherit ideas about what it means to be worthy. Maybe you were taught to be quiet to be loved, or that achievement equals value, or that sacrifice is nobler than authenticity. These beliefs aren't truths, they are conditioning. And with every belief that contradicts your nature, a little part of you goes into hiding. Over time, the real you isn't destroyed, it's simply buried. The pain you feel isn't a flaw, it's the signal. the pressure beneath the surface that says, I can't live like this anymore. It's your inner self knocking from beneath the layers you didn't even know you were carrying expectations, trauma, guilt, shame, roles you never chose. And the moment you mistake that pressure as proof that you're broken, you start trying to fix yourself. You reach for self-help books, external validation, temporary distractions. But you're not broken. There's nothing to fix. There's only something to uncover. Healing doesn't come from becoming someone new. It comes from letting go of who you never were. It's not transformation. In the way most people think, it's excavation. A sacred unburying, a peeling back of all the false selves you've worn just to be accepted. And yes, that process hurts, because those false selves were armor. They kept you safe in moments when you didn't feel strong enough to be real. But what protected you before is now the cage you must step out of. Choosing yourself is the act of saying, I trust who I am beneath all of this. It's saying, I no longer need to be what they need me to be. It's the radical decision to believe that your inner voice, the one that's been drowned out by noise, actually knows the way. And in that choice, healing begins. Not because you've reached perfection, but because you've returned to honesty. You've stopped fighting yourself. You've stopped negotiating your identity for belonging. And that return is powerful. When you stop assuming you're damaged, you begin to explore yourself with curiosity instead of judgment. You become gentle with your story. You begin to understand that your sadness, your anxiety, your confusion, they were never signs of failure. They were invitations to return inward. They were signs that something inside of you was being ignored. It's easy to get caught in the illusion that healing must be dramatic. But often it begins in the quietest of decisions, the moment you say no to what drains you. The moment you walk away from a role that doesn't fit. The moment you sit alone, not in loneliness, but in self-respect. Those small acts of choosing yourself add up, and in time, the layers begin to fall away. And underneath, there you are, still whole, still enough, not perfect, but real, not polished, but free. You are not broken. You were simply taught to be everything but yourself. It's time to remember. Not through striving, but through surrender. Through shedding, not adding. And the moment you do, you'll feel it, not as a rush, but as a homecoming. A soft knowing that says, I was here all along. And that's where healing truly begins. Choosing yourself is an act of remembrance. It's not about constructing a brand new version of you or reaching for some ideal self that exists somewhere in the distance. It's about gently returning to the self that existed before the world told you who to be. It's about peeling back the expectations, the guilt, the roles and the masks, and simply remembering what it feels like to be real again. You were not born confused about your worth. You didn't enter this world doubting your value, questioning your voice, or trying to earn love. That was all taught. Layer by layer, piece by piece, you were conditioned to forget. Conditioned to suppress your instincts, to distrust your emotions, to silence your truth in order to maintain peace or gain approval. And now you sit there wondering why you feel so far from yourself. But it's not because you've changed beyond repair. It's because you've forgotten what you never had to learn in the first place. When you choose yourself, you are not being rebellious. You are being honest. You are no longer willing to betray your own heart just to be accepted by people who don't even know the real you. You stop trying to force yourself into shapes that don't fit. You stop shrinking so others can feel tall. You stop confusing self-abandonment with humility. But here's what no one tells you. Choosing yourself is not a single moment. It's 1,000 small moments, some quiet, some loud, where you remember that your life is your own. It's a sacred daily return. A coming home to the body, the mind, the soul that was always trying to guide you but was drowned out by the world's noise. Every time you say no to what depletes you, you're remembering. Every time you rest when you're tired instead of pushing through for validation, you're remembering. Every time you express your needs, your feelings, your truth, even when it shakes your voice, you're remembering. These are not selfish acts. These are spiritual ones. These are the choices that anchor you to your true self. But remembrance isn't always peaceful. Often it's disruptive, because remembering who you are also means realizing how far you've drifted. It means facing the discomfort of the masks you wore, the lies you told yourself to survive, the people you clung to out of fear rather than love. And that confrontation hurts, but it's a necessary grief, the kind that clears the fog. You'll start to see that most of the suffering wasn't because of who you were, but because you kept forgetting who you were. You kept abandoning yourself for the sake of connection, unaware that any connection built on your absence is already broken. You kept trying to impress people who never once stopped to ask how your soul was doing. When you choose yourself, you break that pattern. You stop looking outward for permission and turn inward for clarity. You realize that your worth has never been tied to how much you do for others or how well you fit in. Your worth is not negotiable. It is not up for debate. It does not rise or fall with praise or criticism. It simply is. The beauty of remembrance is that it doesn't demand perfection, only presence. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to come back again and again to what feels true for you. And with each return, your inner world begins to feel less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to feel your emotions instead of numbing them. You begin to make choices from alignment instead of fear. And slowly, the life you've built from the outside in begins to fall away, making space for a life built from the inside out. People might not understand this shift. They might say you've changed. They might call you distant or difficult. But let them. Because the truth is you're not changing, you're remembering. You're shedding what was never yours to carry. You're reclaiming the parts of you that were silenced, dismissed, or ignored. And in that remembrance, there is peace. A peace that doesn't depend on external validation. A peace that doesn't crumble when others disapprove. A peace that comes from knowing that you are finally, fully, undeniably standing in your own truth. This is what choosing yourself really means. It's not loud. It's not arrogant. It's not about ego. It's a quiet, courageous act of love. A return, not to who the world told you to be, but to who you already are. Pain thrives where you abandon your truth. Not because truth itself hurts, but because denying it fractures something essential within you. That fracture isn't always loud. It doesn't always scream or shatter your world in one dramatic moment. No, it's often a slow erosion, a subtle silence, a quiet internal nod where you agree to something your soul never signed off on. And over time, those tiny denials accumulate. They become tension in the body, restlessness in the mind, and sorrow in the heart. You begin to feel disconnected, even though you're surrounded by people. You feel tired, even after rest. You feel unheard, even when you speak. That is the weight of living in misalignment. You see, truth is not just about facts or honesty with others. It's about alignment with yourself. It's about honoring what you feel deeply, even if no one else understands it. It's that subtle knowing, that inner whisper that says, this isn't right, or I need more, or even I deserve better. But instead of listening, most of us override that voice. We push it down, call it irrational, or label it selfish. Why? Because we've been trained to keep the peace at the expense of our own. What happens when you live that way for too long? The pain doesn't disappear just because you pretend it's not there. It hides. It festers. It shows up in other ways: anxiety, resentment, burnout, even physical illness. These are not just unfortunate symptoms. They are messages. Messages from the parts of you that have been silenced. Pain becomes the language of the unlived life. It speaks when you stop listening. We often ask, why am I in pain? But perhaps the better question is, where have I left myself behind? Because pain, real soul-level pain, is not a punishment. It's a signal, a call to return. And it grows louder the further you drift from your inner knowing. Think of all the ways we abandon our truth. We say yes when we mean no. We stay in relationships where we feel invisible, chase careers that look good on paper, but feel hollow inside. We smile when we want to cry. We make ourselves smaller so others can feel comfortable. Each of these moments chips away at the foundation of our being. And still, we wonder why we're tired, why we feel lost, why we ache. But the truth is simple. Even if it isn't easy, pain is the price we pay for abandoning ourselves. There's hope in this, because if pain is born from self-abandonment, then healing is born from self-honoring. The moment you begin to acknowledge what's true for you, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it threatens to disappoint others, you start to reclaim your peace. That doesn't mean life becomes instantly easy, but it does become real. And in that realness, there's relief. There's grounding. There's the first breath after holding it in for far too long. Choosing your truth requires courage. It often means standing alone. It might mean walking away from what's familiar, but what you gain in return is priceless. Your integrity, your clarity, your sense of self. You begin to feel whole again, not because everything around you is perfect, but because you're no longer split within. Pain thrives in dishonesty, especially the kind you direct inward. The lies you tell yourself to stay comfortable. The roles you play to feel worthy. But when you begin to tell the truth to yourself about yourself, that pain loses its power. It begins to dissolve, not all at once, but in layers. Because pain is not the enemy. Suppression is, what would it look like to stop abandoning your truth? Maybe it's speaking up finally. Maybe it's resting when you've been trained to hustle. Maybe it's ending a cycle that's been passed down for generations. Whatever it is, it starts with a single decision, to believe that your truth matters, that your inner voice is not an inconvenience, it's your compass. The moment you honor that voice, something shifts. You start making different choices, not to avoid pain, but to move through it with awareness. You stop betraying yourself to be liked. You stop fearing solitude because you're no longer at war with your own soul. You find a sense of safety, not in the approval of others, but in the sanctuary of your own honesty. This is the root of healing. It's not about perfection. It's about permission. Permission to feel what you feel, to want what you want, to be who you are, without apology, without justification. Because when you stop abandoning your truth, you stop abandoning yourself. And in that sacred reunion, pain no longer has a place to hide. The world mirrors your self-neglect, or abstract way, but in a very real and tangible sense. The way you treat yourself sets the standard for how others treat you. If you constantly abandon your needs, suppress your voice, and shrink your worth to make space for others, the world doesn't rush in to lift you up. It simply agrees with you. It reflects the message you're sending. I am not important enough to be honored. I can wait. I don't matter as much. This is a truth many people resist because it's easier to blame others for our pain than to confront the places where we've allowed our own voice to be silenced. But the moment you realize that the outer world is often just a projection of your inner landscape, everything changes. Not because the world suddenly becomes softer, but because you begin to understand the power you've always held, the power of how you show up for yourself. When you neglect yourself, when you silence your intuition, overextend your energy, or tolerate disrespect, you create a reality that normalizes that behavior. You begin to attract relationships, opportunities, and experiences that echo the very same neglect you practice internally. This isn't punishment. It's simply how resonance works. The frequency you emit is the one you invite back. And if your energy says, I can be overlooked, then you will find people who do exactly that. Not because they're inherently cruel, but because you're teaching them how to treat you by how you treat yourself. So many people walk through life wondering, why does no one show up for me? Why do I feel invisible? Why am I always giving more than I receive? But what if the answer lies not in how others are treating you, but in how consistently you've been treating yourself like an afterthought? What if the love, the care, the respect you long for from the world must first be built within you? This is not about blame, it's about responsibility. And responsibility is liberating because it puts the power back in your hands. If the world reflects your self-neglect, then it can also reflect your self-honoring. But that shift doesn't happen by demanding more from others. It happens by offering more to yourself. Start paying attention to the choices you make in the quiet moments. Do you speak kindly to yourself when you make a mistake? Do you allow yourself to rest, or do you push through exhaustion for the sake of productivity? Do you set boundaries, or do you say yes to things that drain you just to avoid guilt? These may seem like small things, but they are everything. They're the blueprint of your self-worth. When you choose yourself consistently, unapologetically, the world begins to take notice, not because it suddenly becomes more generous, but because your energy no longer makes space for what dishonors you. You stop entertaining disrespect. You stop investing in one-sided relationships. You stop seeking validation in places that only offer conditional acceptance. And in that shift, you create a new standard, not just for how others treat you, but for how life responds to you. People often confuse choosing themselves with selfishness. But the truth is, self-neglect is not noble. It doesn't serve anyone. When you abandon your needs, you show up in relationships resentful, drained, and disconnected. But when you care for yourself, when you nourish your own soul, you bring wholeness into every interaction. You're not waiting to be completed. You're showing up complete. And that version of you is magnetic, not because you're performing, but because you're in integrity. You're aligned. You're no longer seeking your worth in others. You're embodying it. And the world, being the mirror that it is, begins to respond in kind. It won't always be easy. Some people won't like the new boundaries you set. Some may leave. Let them, because anyone who only loved you when you neglected yourself was never really loving you. They were loving your compliance, your silence, your convenience. But the real you, the one who is honest, clear, and self-respecting, deserves relationships that meet you there. If you want to change your reality, stop asking the world to treat you better. Start treating yourself better. Start showing up for yourself when no one else does. Start choosing rest over burnout, truth over performance, and worth over approval. These are the moments that transform your life, not instantly, but consistently. The world will not honor a version of you that you keep hidden. It will only rise to meet the one you fully own, because the world is always watching. Not your words, not your intentions, but your actions. How you treat yourself is how you instruct the world to treat you. So stop neglecting your soul and expecting others to nourish it. Return to yourself, tend to yourself, choose yourself, and watch the world reflect that choice back to you in ways you never imagined. Authenticity is the foundation of inner peace. Not because being authentic guarantees a life without conflict, but because it ensures that whatever you go through, you're not fighting yourself in the process. Peace isn't the absence of challenge. It's the absence of self-betrayal. It's the quiet strength that comes when your actions, your words, and your inner truth are in harmony. When you no longer feel the need to perform, impress, or prove anything to anyone, something soft and profound settles inside you. A deep sense of being at home within your own skin. Many people chase peace in external forms. They seek it in achievements, in relationships, in possessions. They rearrange their lives, control every detail, and strive to eliminate discomfort. But the truth is, you can live in the most peaceful environment and still be tormented inside if you're not being true to yourself. Because the real war is rarely out there, it's within. It's the tension between who you are and who you think you're supposed to be. The further those two selves drift apart, the louder the inner noise becomes. Authenticity isn't about having all the answers or being bold all the time. It's about honesty. Gentle, consistent honesty. It's the willingness to stand in your own truth, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's messy. It's saying, this is what I feel, or this is what I need, even if it shakes your voice to say it. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real. And that realness, over time, becomes your peace. But let's be honest, authenticity isn't always easy, especially in a world that rewards masks. From a young age, many of us are taught to please others, to adapt, to hide parts of ourselves that are too much or not enough. We become so skilled at being who others want us to be that we lose touch with who we actually are. We learn to perform, to manage impressions, to seek belonging by fragmenting ourselves. But true belonging can never come at the cost of authenticity. Because if you have to hide who you are to be accepted, then you're not truly accepted, only your performance is. This disconnection shows up in quiet, subtle ways. You feel drained after socializing, not because you're an introvert, but because you were pretending the whole time. You feel uneasy in your relationships, not because love is hard, but because you're not showing up as yourself. You feel anxious in your career, not because you're incapable, but because you're following a path that doesn't align with your soul. And all of that inner noise stems from one thing: a life out of alignment with your truth. The good news is that you don't have to figure it all out at once. Reclaiming authenticity is not a grand gesture. It's a practice. It starts in small moments. Saying no when you mean no. Admitting when something doesn't feel right. Asking for what you need without apologizing. Being willing to disappoint others rather than betray yourself. These moments build trust with yourself. And that self-trust becomes peace. Because when you're authentic, you're no longer negotiating your identity. You're no longer overthinking every move. You're no longer performing for acceptance. And that internal stillness, that sense of congruence, is worth more than any applause. But being authentic doesn't mean you won't face resistance. In fact, when you begin to live from your truth, you might lose people. You might be misunderstood. That's because your authenticity will disrupt dynamics that depended on your compliance. People who were comfortable with your silence may not know what to do with your honesty. But remember this: anyone who is repelled by your truth was never aligned with your soul in the first place. The ones who matter will not just tolerate your authenticity, they will honor it. And more importantly, you'll begin to honor it. You'll stop feeling like you have to earn your right to exist. You'll stop second-guessing your every feeling. You'll stop outsourcing your sense of self. You'll realize that your peace was never missing. It was just buried under layers of pretending. You were never meant to fit perfectly into this world's expectations. You were meant to show up as you are, not as an echo of someone else, but as the original voice that only you carry. And when you do, life opens up in new ways. You attract people who resonate with your truth, not your performance. You find opportunities that align with your spirit, not just your skill. You begin to live with clarity, not confusion. With depth, not distraction. This is the gift of authenticity. A life that feels like yours. Not borrowed, not staged, not filtered, but real. And in that realness, peace becomes possible. Not because life is always easy, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. If you're tired, anxious, or lost, don't chase peace out there. Come back to yourself. Be honest, even if your voice trembles. Be true, even if it costs you comfort. Be you, even if it's unfamiliar at first. Because your peace is not somewhere far away. It lives in your truth. And that truth is always waiting for you to return. Loneliness often precedes transformation. Not because isolation is inherently powerful, but because in the quiet space where distractions fade, you finally hear your own soul speak. For most of your life, you've been surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, voices telling you who to be, how to act, what to chase. You've been entangled in connections that sometimes comforted you, sometimes confused you, and often distracted you from your own becoming. But when the noise falls away, when the people leave, when the stage dims, when you're left alone with yourself, something profound happens. You're confronted with what remains, and what remains is truth. Raw, unpolished, maybe even uncomfortable. But it's yours, and it's only in the silence of solitude that you begin to see who you are without the mirrors of others reflecting back what they want from you. That's why loneliness, though painful, is often a sacred passage. It strips you bare. It removes the roles, the performances, the illusions. It says, now that there's no one to impress, who are you really? This question can feel terrifying, because when you've spent your life defining yourself through others, their love, their validation, their presence, solitude feels like death. And in a way it is. It's the death of the identity built on dependence. It's the end of who you were when you needed others to define your worth. But every death, if embraced with awareness, is a beginning in disguise. Transformation begins when you stop running from the emptiness and start listening to it. When you stop reaching for the next distraction and allow yourself to sit in the void. Because in that void, you're not actually alone. You're with yourself, perhaps for the first time in a long time. And that self has something to say. It has desires, wounds, dreams, wisdom, but you've been too busy, too afraid, too externally focused to truly hear it. This is the hidden gift of loneliness. It brings you back to your essence. It forces you to meet the parts of yourself that were silenced in crowded rooms. It asks you to tend to the neglected spaces within, the ones that ache not for company, but for connection with yourself. And once you begin that reconnection, the transformation begins. You start to see things clearly. Patterns become obvious. You realize how often you tolerated less than you deserved just to feel less alone. You recognize the times you said yes to things that drained you simply because you feared the silence that followed a no. You understand that the love you sought from others was really a longing to feel at home within your own being. And as clarity rises, your standards rise too. You no longer settle for relationships that cost you your peace. You no longer chase those who only show up when it's convenient. You no longer betray yourself for temporary companionship. Because once you've tasted the peace that comes from inner alignment, you lose your appetite for anything less than real. Transformation through loneliness doesn't mean becoming hard or distant. It means becoming whole. It means knowing your value so deeply that you're willing to be alone rather than fragmented. It means discovering that your worth isn't based on your ability to be needed, wanted, or praised, but on your existence alone. The irony is that once you've embraced the solitude, once you've allowed it to refine you, you become someone new, someone grounded, someone sovereign, someone magnetic. You no longer attract from desperation, but from truth. You no longer seek love as a rescue, but as a reflection of what you've already given yourself. People will notice the shift. Some will be drawn to your light. Others will be unsettled by your boundaries. Let them react as they will. Because this transformation is not for them, it's for you. It's the becoming that only happens when you've walked through the wilderness of yourself and decided not to abandon who you are, even in your most silent moments. If you find yourself alone right now, don't rush to escape it. Don't fill the space too quickly. Let it speak. Let it shape you. Let it reveal what you were too distracted to see. The ache of loneliness is real, but it is not the enemy. It's the invitation to grow, to remember, to return, because loneliness is not the absence of others. It's the absence of connection with yourself. And once you bridge that gap, you discover a strength that no one can give you and no one can take away. And in that strength, you transform quietly, steadily, completely. You spend so much of your life waiting for someone to finally understand you, for the perfect moment to arrive, for the apology that never comes. You stand at the edge of yourself, hoping the world will notice, that someone will rescue you from the quiet ache that clings to your chest. But healing does not arrive on the wings of others. It arrives the moment you stop waiting and decide to return to yourself. That choice to choose yourself is not selfishness. It is sacred responsibility. Many people walk through life fragmented because they've given away pieces of themselves to every hand that asked. Approval from a parent, validation from a partner, recognition from strangers. We stretch ourselves thin for love that comes with terms and affection that fluctuates with performance. The world taught us that choosing ourselves is rebellion. But the truth is, choosing ourselves is rebellion. But the truth is, choosing yourself is not a betrayal of others. It's the moment you stop betraying your own soul. To choose yourself means to stop outsourcing your worth. Think about that for a moment. How many of your decisions are rooted not in what you feel, but in how you will be perceived? You say yes when you mean no, smile when you're breaking, perform strength while silently crumbling. Why? Because deep inside, you've been conditioned to believe that your value is determined by how much of yourself you give away. But healing begins when you realize your worth is inherent. You don't need to earn it. You simply need to return to it. This return is not dramatic. It is quiet, like coming home after a long journey. It is not loud or showy. It is soft. It is a whisper that says, I am here. I have always been here. That moment when you sit with yourself, not in judgment, but in compassion, is the beginning of your healing. When you finally stop abandoning yourself to belong elsewhere, you discover a deeper kind of belonging, the kind that can never be taken away. Healing begins when you allow yourself to feel without shame, to grieve the versions of you who kept performing, who kept pleasing, who kept pretending to be okay. It begins when you forgive yourself, not for being weak, but for believing that you had to be strong all the time. Choosing yourself is choosing to feel fully, to experience the raw and real moments that are often buried beneath layers of self-denial. These feelings are not obstacles. They are pathways. They lead you back to wholeness. And then something extraordinary happens. When you choose yourself, you stop begging for crumbs. You stop tolerating what no longer serves you. You stop shrinking to fit into spaces that never saw your fullness, because you begin to see yourself not as something broken needing to be fixed, but as something sacred needing to be remembered. And when you remember, truly remember who you are, you become a sanctuary for yourself. Many fear this choice because it often means being misunderstood. It may mean walking alone, letting go of relationships that only love the version of you that stayed small. But solitude is not emptiness. It is spaciousness. It is the sacred pause that allows you to breathe your own air again. When you no longer chase after people to prove your worth, you become magnetic, because there is something undeniably powerful about a person who is no longer hungry for validation. Choosing yourself does not mean you isolate from the world. It means you stop abandoning your inner world. It means you create boundaries that protect your peace. It means you speak with honesty, live with integrity, and act with authenticity. You stop being who the world told you to be and start becoming who you truly are. And that shift ripples through everything. Your energy changes, your relationships evolve, your purpose becomes clearer. The world needs more people who have chosen themselves, not in arrogance, but in alignment. Because when you are full within, you do not need to take from others. You become someone who gives without depletion. You become a mirror for others to see their own light. You become a reminder that healing is possible, that it begins not out there, but in here with a simple, radical, powerful choice. To return to yourself. If you are waiting for a sign, let this be it. You don't need another reason to choose yourself. You only need the courage to say, I am enough, exactly as I am, not someday. Not when I've healed everything, but now, especially now. Because your healing begins the moment you do. You spend your whole life seeking healing from the outside. You read books, chase teachers, perform rituals, take advice, scroll through endless feeds, hoping to find the missing piece. But healing doesn't begin there. Healing begins the moment you say to yourself, I matter. I choose myself. That's not arrogance. That's the foundation of everything you've ever sought. You cannot build a palace on soil you despise, and your soul is that soil. If you reject it, no structure you build will stand. Choosing yourself is not about dismissing others or living in isolation. It is about returning home, not to your house, but to your essence. When you stop outsourcing your worth to how others see you, to whether or not they approve, love, stay, or understand, you will experience a seismic shift inside. You'll feel the soft tremor of self-recognition. For the first time, your body will stop bracing for rejection. Your mind will stop negotiating your value. You will simply be, and that's where healing unfolds. The moment you choose yourself, you begin to withdraw energy from battles you never needed to fight. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to impress those who cannot be impressed. Not because you're not enough, but because they're not even looking. You start to see that it's not your job to convince anyone of your worth. That's a job you were never hired for. You were born worthy. It's not a debate, it's a birthright. When you choose yourself, your energy stops leaking. That leaking happens every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you make yourself small to keep someone else comfortable. Every time you abandon your own intuition to avoid conflict. These are tiny wounds, but they add up until you're living in a body full of splinters and calling it normal. But choosing yourself means you begin removing them. Gently, one by one, you stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even notice your wounds. It's easy to confuse healing with fixing. But healing is not fixing what is broken. It's realizing you were never truly broken to begin with. Wounded, yes. Misled, maybe. But never ruined. The moment you choose yourself, you no longer see your scars as shameful. You see them as sacred, reminders that you survived what once tried to erase you. You wear them, not with pride or guilt, but with truth. And truth is always healing. You'll notice something strange when you begin choosing yourself. The noise starts to quiet. The chaos you thought was around you was actually within you. Fed by the war you were waging against your own soul, you begin to find peace. Not because the world changes, but because you stop needing it to. You begin to live from the inside out, not the outside in. And that change, that shift of origin, is what transforms everything. People may not applaud this change. In fact, some will resist it. They were comfortable with the version of you that dimmed your light for theirs to shine. But that's not your responsibility. You were not born to be the background music to someone else's life. You are the melody. You are the story. When you choose yourself, you reclaim your role as the author of your life. Not a passive reader waiting for someone else to write a happy ending, but the one who picks up the pen, even with shaky hands, and begins again. And in choosing yourself, you give others permission to do the same. You become the mirror that says, yes, it's allowed. You can love yourself too. This is not selfishness. This is sacred, because a person who truly chooses themselves does not take from others. They overflow. They become so rooted in their own being that they are no longer a vacuum of need, but a vessel of presence. Your healing begins the moment you choose yourself, because that's the moment you stop trying to be someone else. You stop rehearsing roles that were never yours. You stop filtering your joy, your tears, your truth. You begin to feel life again, raw, unedited, and real. And in that aliveness, healing happens, not as a goal, but as a byproduct of living in alignment with your own soul. If you're waiting for a sign, for permission, for the perfect time, this is it. Choose yourself. Not just once, but every day. Every time you doubt, choose yourself again. Every time you're tempted to abandon yourself for approval, come home again. Because healing doesn't arrive with a bang or a miracle. It arrives quietly, steadily, each time you whisper to yourself, I am enough as I am. I am worthy of my own love. And that truly is where everything begins. When you finally choose yourself, you stop running from the very thing you've been seeking your entire life, your own wholeness. The world taught you to reach outward, to wait for permission, to beg for validation and love, to mold yourself to fit someone else's narrative. But all along, the treasure was buried within. Your healing does not begin when others understand you, appreciate you, or love you. It begins the moment you realize you don't need them to. Choosing yourself isn't about becoming selfish. It's about returning to the truth of your being, realizing that you are not incomplete, not broken, not waiting to be fixed by the love of another. You are already the answer, the refuge, the peace you seek. You were just taught to forget. All the suffering you've endured, the emotional wounds, the abandonment, the quiet ache in your chest, is not your enemy. These are sacred signals from your soul. They are pointing you inward. They are begging you to stop bleeding for people who never intended to heal with you. They are asking you to slow down, be still, and listen to the quiet truth you've been drowning out, that you are enough. When you finally stop giving your power away, you stop negotiating your worth. You walk differently. You speak differently. You breathe differently. Not because the world around you has changed, but because you have. You no longer measure your value by how others treat you because you now realize they're only meeting you at the level of their own awareness. You forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You let go, not because you're weak, but because carrying pain was never your purpose. This is the moment your healing begins. Not in revenge, not in proving anything, not in forcing life to cooperate with your expectations, but in radical acceptance. Acceptance of your story, acceptance of your flaws, acceptance of your light. You become whole the moment you stop trying to be perfect. To choose yourself is to reclaim your time, your energy, your spirit. It is to recognize that you are not here to be everything for everyone. You are here to be honest, to be true, to be free. You are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not wrong for walking away from what doesn't nourish your soul. And you are certainly not broken for outgrowing what you once tolerated. Growth often looks like separation, silence, solitude, and it's okay. Because what you build in the quiet will echo through the rest of your life. If you're listening to this, and there's a part of you still waiting for a sign, consider this it. You don't need more time. You don't need more excuses. You don't need to earn your healing. You only need to give yourself permission to come home to yourself, to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Your healing begins now, not tomorrow, not when they apologize, not when things make sense, but now. In this breath, in this stillness, in this moment of courageous return to your own heart. And when you choose yourself, truly, deeply, unapologetically, you don't just heal your own life. You become a beacon. You remind others that they too can stop surviving and start living. This is your rebirth, your quiet revolution, your sacred beginning. Choose yourself and begin.